Hello and welcome back to the potting shed here at North Lodge. As always, I'm the gardener Ben, and we are past the 1st of March, which means it is the most exciting time of the year in the garden for me. It is time to start planting your dahlia tubers. Now, I know a lot of you will have already got super excited and got your dahlia tubers into pots, and you're bringing them on in the house, greenhouse or grow tent, whatever your setup might be. But realistically, us professional gardeners always do this by counting back approximately 8 weeks from the date of our last expected frost. Now, here on the south coast of England, on the outskirts of the New Forest, our last frost is generally towards the back end of May, somewhere around my birthday in the 3rd or 4th week of May. So counting back approximately 8 weeks from then brings us to exactly now. So if you haven't done your dahlia tubers, now is the perfect time to get them in the ground. And I'm going to tour you through how I do mine in the greenhouse, which is very, very simple. And also 1 or 2 hints and tips that I'd like to pass on to you to make sure that you get the maximum success from growing and buying your dahlia tubers, because they are fraught with an awful lot of pitfalls that can mean that you can be wasting quite a lot of money. Now, I've picked up my order from Gilbert's Dahlias over the last couple of days. Very, very excited to see this new variety making it to the UK. This one is Kaz Cloud, actually hand pollinated and bred by Santa Cruz Dahlias, way off in that wonderful part of the world, California, and has now made it to the UK shore. So I'm really looking forward to growing that exceedingly large cactus style dinner plate dahlia, which apparently produces blooms around this size on really, really strong sturdy stems, much like Kelvin Floodlight. So this one for me is going to be booked to be a really, really good one. The first thing I want to talk to you about with growing dahlias is, to say, not to get them in the ground too early. If you've already done that, there's nothing I can do about that. But if you haven't done that, please, now is the time to do it. And I'm also going to suggest at this point, it makes me feel physically sick. And I mean, it does make me feel physically uncomfortable. And as a professional gardener, I have to stand away from my phone on many chances or many opportunities on the phone, and especially on the internet, when I see people doing things that I really don't agree with. I try and wherever possible to be positive and impart my knowledge and my wisdom onto you through vast amounts of growing experience over the last 28 years to make sure that you have the maximum success. If you were one of those people that for some reason divided your dahlia tubers before you stored them, I'm really hoping they're okay. It's not something I would advise. It's not something I would advise you do with your perennials outside as well, dividing them in sort of September, October, November. It's a long old drag from then until now, and if your weather conditions and your storage conditions aren't okay, you may have lost an awful lot of your tubers due to the fact you got overexcited and for some reason decided to divide them. I don't even like this dividing dahlia tubers now. I mean, a lot of these I've picked up from Gilbert's Dahlias are the perfect size for a 1st and 2nd year tuber. They'll produce really nice, strong quality plants this year. 1 or 2 of these are really quite large, and I could get away with splitting them, but why would I want to? I know you're going to want more plants. I know if you've got something you really, really like, you're going to want to divide that. You maybe want to give one to your friends or family, or you want another one in another location in the garden. But what I'm going to say to you with this is, with dahlias, don't do it just yet. You are far better potting up your dahlia tuber, getting it growing, getting it away strongly, and then doing cuttings off of it, which I can show you how to do in the next few weeks. You'll have much better success. And I do take the point that you won't end up with such a large plant in its 1st year. You might be putting yourself back about 1 year in the size of the tube that you're going to be overwintering next year, depending on how you want to do that, whether you, like me, leave them in the ground or raise them and store them within their soil and don't wash them off like an awful lot of people do. But the risk to your tubers by dividing them at any stage is really, really high. Now, if a bit falls off, that's a different matter. If in the potting process a bit falls off of the actual tuber itself and you decide, actually, no, I think I'm going to pot that up, either you can pot that in the same pot so you know what it is, or you can put that in another pot, lay it in a seed tray, for instance, and see if you can get some eyes to go on that. But for me, I don't like dividing dahlia tubers. The fact that they can rot off and you can lose your parent plant is too heartbreaking and too gut-wrenching for me, even with all of my experience. So what I tend to do is I tend to take cuttings of the ones that I really, really like to make sure I've got plenty of stock to overwinter, or if I want more tubers, or if I want to give them away to family and friends. So I don't like dividing them at this stage. But what I do is I take my tubers from Gilbert's. These are the new varieties. I don't know how many I've got in the box, I must confess. It's quite a lot. Probably too many. I've got too many dahlias, as I've got too many roses, so I've got too much of everything. Anyway, in the box are all my new tubers in paper bags like this one. who is this? Red Cap. As a, oh, look at that, it's a lovely tuber. Let's get this one out of the bag and have a look at it. See, look, lovely plump tuber, really, really nice. I say I could get away with dividing that if I wanted to, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to damage this tuber whatsoever. Gilberts have done a really good job of looking after it, and it's now ready to plant. I can't see any eyes coming on this one just yet. It needs a little bit of moisture just to wake her up just a little bit, but I don't want to break things off of this, and I don't want to risk rotting this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pot these up, and I'm going to talk you through the very basic process of how I do that. I wouldn't suggest you bring your dahlia tubers into the house. I'm going to put these on the floor out of the way, by the way. So excuse me while I disappear for a second. Grab a couple of tubers out of the box. And how I do mine is I simply match up a dahlia with a correct size pot. Now, I said to you very, very early on in this tutorial, I don't want you to be thinking about bedding out your dahlias until around the 3rd or 4th week of May. You need somewhere frost free and frost protected to keep them until then. So a greenhouse, a cold frame, a grow tent, anywhere that you can be confident those temperatures aren't going to drop below about 3 degrees. Realistically, we want them stable up to about 7 to 9 degrees all through the day and all through the night to make sure they've got enough warmth to get them moving. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a tuber and I'm going to marry it up with a plastic pot. This one is Sam Hopkins. A lovely, look, you can see, nice chunky tuber. That one again could get away with dividing, but I'm not going to do that. I've no need for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to marry that up to a decent sized pot. And the reason why I'm burbling about the size of pots is because I don't want you to be bedding these out until around the 3rd or 4th week of May, and you need to be able to handle these. So not only does the plant need enough room to establish itself and grow, but you also need to be able to get this out of the pot. Now, Gardener Ben has great big shovel-like hands, but even my hands are only so big. And a little bit of warning, if you pop these into pots that are too large, for instance, you go into a 7.5, 8, 9 or 10 litre pot, they're going to be too big for you to turn out. The reason why I'm turning is I'm grabbing some larger pots. So some of these tubers from Gilbert's are really quite large. What's this one here? They're going to need to go into something like this. This is a 7.5. This is about as big as my hands will go. So basically, when I come to plant this out, I'm going to have to turn, because the stems are really fleshy. They don't create any woody growth. You have to be able to get hold of the actual stem itself, which you can't do. So your other option is you're left there and putting your hand around the plant and turning the whole thing up like turning a cake upside down. Now, if your pot is too large, your dahlia simply won't hold together. They do produce an awful lot of roots, but obviously most of the power is in the tuber. And after about 8 weeks in the pot, they've only just really started getting themselves away. So again, what you don't want to do, like buying a bare root rose that's then been potted, you don't want to knock it out of its pot and disturb it too soon. So make sure the pots you're potting into aren't too big for you to handle. Anything below about 5 or 6 litres is absolutely ideal. So when you turn them over, you've got full control over the actual plant, and you don't take the pot off and the whole thing falls together. Catastrophic for bedding out a dahlia at that point. You can find it will rapidly go into shock. The days by then are starting to warm up. We can have daytime temperatures into the early 20s. The whole thing will go limp, and you can probably find it. It might survive that season, but will probably die off in the winter the next year because you put it into so much shock and trauma. So do choose the size of your pots very, very carefully. Right, put that one to one side. This one, Sam Hopkins, is a relatively small tuber, and what I'm going to start by doing is the same as what I do with lilies when I plant lilies into pots. I always start my lilies in pots the same as I do my dahlias, and then I bed them out into their final positions where they're then left. And I do this in this way because I can get the opportunity to put some gravel and some drainage into the bottom of the pot. So using a compost scoop, I'm just going to put a couple of decent sized scoops of horticultural grit into the very, very bottom of this pot, which means that when I come to plant it in the ground in its final location, possibly in the cutting garden just behind me, it's already got a nice cushion of grit underneath of it, and it's not going to be sat in wet soil. Not going to be sat in wet soil while it's in this pot, or whether it's in a larger pot for the actual summer, but when it's bedded out into the ground, it's got a nice couple of inches of horticultural grit already underneath of it, like I do with my lilies. So once that's done, you then just need to cut a couple of decent sized handfuls of soil into the plant, and you're looking to plant your dahlia tuber literally at soil level. Now that's a little bit proud. I need to just wiggle that one around a little bit and get that one down. You can see this tuber is very, very long. It realistically could be like that in the ground, but actually the eyes are going to be pointing up on this one. So I'm going to plant that like that, and then I'm simply going to backfill with some loose peat-free compost. Break it up as you go, make sure it is all nice and loose and fluffy. You don't want to compact that in around this tuber too much. These are then going to be labelled. Please don't forget to label your dahlia tubers. This stage they're going to be labelled with a white plastic label. I reuse these over and over and over again. I put these through the dishwasher. I use just a little bit of sometimes a little bit of nail varnish remover to move pen and pencils or rubbers to get the pencil marks off of those. You can make your own out of milk bottles if you wanted to. Cut them up, and once you have potted the dahlia up, give it a little bit of a firm round, a little bit of a tap on your workbench to get any air bubbles out of the soil, and then we're looking to have, you see, the dahlia tuber ever so slightly just proud. I'm then going to take some more horticultural grit, and I'm going to dress the top of the pot off with about 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch of horticultural grit. Several reasons for doing that. It keeps the pesky slugs and snails at bay. I know we'll all have terrible problems with your dahlias at a very young age, and as this starts to grow, it's very, very vulnerable. Obviously the tuber is now at its weakest point that it's been since it was lifted, and you're now asking it to grow away. Everything it's got stored is all it's got. There's no more energy going into this unless it produces green growth, and if that green growth is then stripped away by slugs and snails, you've then got a tuber that's really going to start to struggle. So the dressing of horticultural grit, you can also use crushed up eggshell or seashells if you wanted to. I'm seeing an awful lot of that on the internet at the moment, which is really good, but for me it's horticultural grit at this particular stage. Dress that off with horticultural grit. You will then need to give this a label. This one is of course Sam Hopkins, as we saw at the very beginning of this tutorial. Give it a label, get it into the greenhouse, and you want to get a bit of heat behind this. You want to see temperatures to be stable at somewhere in the region of about 7 to 12 degrees if you can. I know it's a little bit dodgy, but if you get them in and you don't keep them too wet, that is the actual perfect time. And in around 12 maybe to 24 days you should start seeing some growth on them. Now it depends on how warm your greenhouse is. If your greenhouse or your growing setup is really quite warm, you could see eyes appearing on these anywhere over the next sort of 7 to 10 days. But realistically, don't be poking about with this until it's been in the ground for at least 21 to 28 days. If you get to the 28-day point and you think I've not seen anything from that at all, very, very gingerly you'll need to take this back out over a potting tray like I've got here. Hold the tuber carefully and tip it out and see if you have any growth. The other way of doing it is to look underneath the pot and see if you have any thread-like growth coming through the bottom holes. That's a sure sign that the tuber might not have started putting on top growth, but it may have actually already started rooting. If you see those signs, give it another week or so, but if you're not seeing any thread-like growth coming out of the bottom of the pot after say 21 to 28 days, tip it out and see what condition it's in. If it's still viable, i.e. it's still firm and it's not shriveled up and started to rot, pop it back in and give it a little bit more heat. You may want to consider popping it onto a heat mat or under a cloche in the greenhouse just to force a little bit more heat into it, because some of these varieties are later, like all varieties of roses or irises, whatever they might be. Everything flowers at slightly different times, and therefore you can find they're slightly later to wake up. But you should be seeing some growth over the next 21 to 28 days. If the tuber has unfortunately rotted, you'll need to throw it away and maybe think about replacing it, or maybe add it back to your list for 2024, because you're not going to be growing it in 2023. Anyway, if you have any queries or questions, you always know how to get hold of me. Feel free to leave me a comment in the section below. Save this video for later if you're not growing along in real time. As always, I'm the Gardener Ben, and it's been a pleasure talking to you today. I will see you all again very, very soon. Take care.